In a dystopian future, Earth is suffering from a devastating pollution that has made nearly all water sources incredibly toxic. Amid this ecological collapse, a global conflict has erupted, with nations battling for control over the planet's scarce reserves of potable water. As a desperate bid to stop the extinction of humanity, a fleet of spaceships is quickly assembled. Their mission is to journey to Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, believed to have a massive reservoir of drinkable water. We're introduced to one particular spacecraft in this fleet, the Red Queen, which has successfully landed on Europa and began the extraction process. Frank, a diligent crew member, informs the Captain Jim that they're making excellent progress as the water tanks are almost full. Eager to return home, Captain Jim instructs the ship's computer system, affectionately named Red, to prepare for liftoff. And we see that he doesn't want to waste a single extra minute on this foreign moon. Commander Alex, who has been busy fixing some equipment on the ship, receives a message from Red to secure his area for takeoff. Similarly, Red notifies Dr. Ken, another crucial team member, to ready his station for liftoff. The ship's engines roar to life, and the Red Queen soars in the sky, bound for Earth. Having successfully embarked on their return journey, Jim records a heartfelt message to be sent back to Earth. He sets the spaceship on autopilot and instructs Red to awaken the crew only when they're 2 hours away from their home planet. As they settle in for the journey back, the crew takes some personal time to connect with loved ones through pre-recorded messages. Frank watches a message from his mom, who reads him a Bible verse and tells him how proud the church community is of his contributions. Kat, another crew member, views a message from her fiancé, who promises to marry her upon her safe return. Continuing their journey back to Earth, Kat takes charge of placing the new crew in status pods, where they'll be in deep sleep for the majority of the trip. Frank struggles to relax, his heart rate is unusually high. Noticing this, Alex lends Frank his lucky hat to calm his nerves. And after ensuring everybody is safe in status, they all drift into months-long sleep, programmed to be awakened only 2 hours away from Earth. But their return wasn't as smooth as planned. They're jolted awake in the middle of an asteroid belt, and Captain Jim immediately takes manual control of the ship, switching off the autopilot. A tense struggle ensues as they try to navigate through the hazardous asteroid field, and tragically, they lose one of their precious water tanks, and even worse, an asteroid impacts the ship, taking Kat's life in the process. Jeff confronts Red, the ship's computer, questioning it why it didn't wake them up sooner. When Alex informs the rest of the crew of Kat's untimely death, Jim, overwhelmed with emotions, instructs Red to shut down and hand over complete control to him. But surprisingly, Red, who's programmed to assess human emotional state, declines Jim's request. This is when you know your AI has gone rogue. It argues that Jim is under extreme stress and as a result is compromising the safety of the remaining crew. Red then takes the extraordinary step of relieving Jim of his duties, naming Alex as the new captain. Following this shocking turn of events, Red shuts down all power systems and Jim orders it to restore power, but Red remains unresponsive to him. And when Alex gives the same command, Red promptly obeys. As they assess their situation, Alex queries Red about their current location. The answer leaves them stunned. They are near the moon, and both the moon and Earth have been utterly destroyed, along with everyone they loved and cared for. The grim reality is driven home by a final recorded message from Earth, warning anyone who might receive it to immediately leave Earth's orbit, as the nuclear weapons have been activated. The transmission abruptly ends with the destruction of Earth, and overcome with grief and fury, Jim storms off, overwhelmed by the loss of his family. While freshening up, he notices that he started to bleed, adding to the alarm. Later, Frank approaches Alex with concerns about Jim's increased volatility, especially his threats to shut down Red. Alex, however, defends Jim, reminding Frank that Jim has saved his life more than once. As they come to terms with this tragic circumstance, the crew holds a makeshift funeral for Kat. Alex delivers a heartfelt tribute, recalling her contributions and the wonderful person that she was. To be honest, the procession should have included all the people on Earth that died, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. Anyways, they give Kat a space burial, sending her body out into the cosmos. The atmosphere on board is laden with sorrow and uncertainty as the crew grapples with the profound loss of Earth and also all the people that they cared and loved. Soon after, the crew of the Red Queen gathers in the dining area for a much-needed meal. Alex, clearly not thrilled with his current cosmic location, comments about how he misses being on Earth, especially the simple pleasures of enjoying a porterhouse steak. Jim, the former captain, opens up up about his guilt over Kat's death, admitting that if they had returned to Earth soon, things might have turned out differently. Alex tries to offer some comfort, reminding Jim that they still have to find joy in the simple things, given their very, very grim circumstances. However, Jim can't shake his frustration with the ship's AI Red, or get over the overwhelming odds that they're the only survivors in the universe where billions once used to live. Frank jumps in, advocating for the power of faith in God as a way to find peace. But this only upsets Jim further as he points out the harsh reality. Kat was the last woman alive, and Earth and humanity as they knew it are gone. But despite Frank's insistence on trusting in a higher power, Jim strongly rejects the idea of God. And in a fit of anger, Jim starts to strangle Frank, but Alex intervenes just in time to prevent tragedy. Later, in the solitude of his room, Jim is haunted by dreams of his wife. Meanwhile, Alex starts to feel incredibly ill, vomiting and breaking out into sweats. The next morning, as the crew discusses their survival strategy, Alex's condition worsens dramatically, and he has a seizure and begins to vomit a strange white substance. Then, in a shocking twist, Alex starts to physically transform into a woman. I guess nature had to balance things out? Standing up, Frank interprets this as a divine sign, claiming Alex has been chosen as an angel for the salvation of the human race. But overwhelmed, Alex collapses against Jim. After a while, Alex regains consciousness and is bewildered to find himself, or herself, transformed into a woman. After helping him back into his room, Jim assures Alex that they'll find a way to reverse what's happening, offering him a pill to help him relax. Frank, who views the transformation as a miracle that could allow for human reproduction, is not really interested in helping Alex go back to being a guy, and he's accepted the fact that Alex is now a girl. He takes a shower and then joins Frank, making light of the situation as if an alien had taken over his body. Wanting some feel of his former self, Alex asks Red to match his new female voice to his original male voice, and when Red confirms the match, it finally recognizes him as Alex. Frank, still holding on to his idea of divine intervention, suggests that Alex could now bear children. Alex, however, is focused on more immediate concerns. He starts searching for a new habitable planet for them to call home, but Red interrupts, informing Alex that their ship needs to be repaired and that it must be complete before they can even think of exploring new worlds. The next day, Alex struggles to seal an opening in the ship. His newfound physical weakness makes it very difficult to complete the task. Jim notices this and offers to help, but Alex, stubborn and perhaps a little embarrassed, initially refuses. Sensing that Alex could hurt himself, Jim persuades him to accept the assistance, and together they successfully seal the opening. Later, as Alex showers, he's haunted by an imaginary vision of Kat. When he's done, he decides to put on some of Kat's clothes and heads for a morning jog through the ship. Meanwhile, Frank and Jim engage in another heated conversation. Frank insists that God has not abandoned humanity, reinterpreting recent events as a sign of divine intervention. Jim, however, responds sarcastically, asking Frank why he doesn't just pray for God to find them another Earth and supply an endless stream of food. The conversation then shifts to the topic of breeding, and Frank argues that God has given them a woman, referring to Alex's transformation as a means to continue the human race. Jim counters this point, pointing out the pointlessness of having children when there's no suitable way to feed them. When Frank implies that this doesn't concern Jim, Jim fires back, questioning if whether Frank has considered what Alex might think about all this, and he underscores that it's Alex's body and ultimately his choice, or her choice, either way. Alex returns from his run, visibly sweating but composed, and he informs Red that the repairs are done and that it's time to move the ship. As the engines roar to life, Alex inquires about any updates concerning his transformation. Jim admits that they're still facing difficulties in finding a solution, and Alex then turns to Frank and brings up their previous conversation about his altered DNA. He proposes tracing the inconsistencies between his male and female DNA to map out what exactly happened to him. Frank contemplates the idea, acknowledging that it might be possible to run a computer simulation to better understand the transformation. When Alex asks if whether it could lead to reversing the changes, Frank hesitates, indicating that he's not entirely sure. Undeterred, Alex pleads with Frank to try recognizing Frank's technical skills with computers, and after a moment of hesitation, Frank agrees to give it a shot. While they wait for the simulation, Alex and Jim go to repair other sections of the ship. During this work, Alex catches Jim casting curious glances at his transformed body. Alex reassures Jim that he holds no grudges, and Jim is visibly appreciative appreciative of how well Alex is handling the whole situation. But just then, Frank arrives with news. He asks Jim to go check out the simulation results while he talks to Alex privately. Jim leaves, and what he sees on the computer screen is shocking. According to the simulation, Alex has always had the genetic markers of a female. The revelation adds yet another layer of complexity to their already bewildering circumstances, leaving them all to ponder the implications for their uncertain future. Meanwhile, Frank confronts Alex, now going by Alice due to his transformation, and insists that what's happening is actually divine intervention. He tells Alice that she has been chosen by God to bear children, and ignoring her discomfort, Frank leans in for a very uncalled for and forceful kiss and begins to touch her really inappropriately. And just then, Jim bursts into the room and shoves Frank away. Angry and feeling really violated, Alice storms out of the room, with Jim following closely behind. And for a fleeting moment, Jim thinks that he sees his deceased wife's features superimposed on Alice's face. Concerned, he calls out to Alice, who seems visibly shaken by the encounter with Frank. Alice opens up about how she's struggling to adjust to the rapid changes happening to her body and also her mindset, expressing a desire to be a guy again. Jim tentatively asks if Alice has also started experiencing desires as a woman, which she quickly denies. She then confides in Jim about feeling vulnerable and helpless, especially after the very uncomfortable incident with Frank. Jim tries to comfort her, vowing to protect her and prevent any further incidents. However, Alice catches Jim referring to her as Alice, the name of his late wife. Jim initially denies the slip, but then apologizes, and just then, Alice notices blood trickling down from Jim's nose, and the two part ways, each lost in their own thoughts. Now increasingly delusional, Jim confronts Frank, warning him to stay away from Alice, whom he's confusing with his deceased wife. Frank counters by stating that God has given him a woman to begin a new family with, and Jim mentions that Alice would never choose Frank, to which Frank responds that Jim is too old to be a viable option for the future. Enraged, Jim punches Frank, proving that age doesn't deprive him of strength. Later, Jim finds Alice and they share a more open conversation. Alice talks about protandry, a biological phenomenon seen in some species of fish where the male transforms into a female when the female dies, ensuring the species' survival. This leads Jim to share a haunting experience from a mission 15 years prior on Mars. While waiting for his crew to return from sample collection, he heard a blood-curdling scream. Upon investigation, he discovered one crew member being sucked underground and another split in half against a window. Panicked, he fled back to Earth alone, abandoning his crew. Alice comforts Jim, reassuring him that he's not alone in his guilt and trauma. She then confesses that she's starting to develop feelings for Jim, but is frightened by how wrong it feels given the circumstances. And when Jim reaches out to touch her face, Alice abruptly tells him to stop and leave, highlighting the very complex emotional landscape that they're both trying to navigate. Still rattled by recent events, Jim seeks out Frank, who offers an apology for his previous behavior. Strangely, Jim seems to be experiencing memory loss, as he can't even recognize the faces in his family photos. The next day takes an even darker turn. Frank puts an electronic neck cuff on Alice and gives her a cruel test. While she tries to escape by slapping him and running, Frank activates the cuff, sending an electric shock through her body, knocking her unconscious. While this is happening, Jim is in another part of the ship, wrestling with painful memories from his ill-fated mission on Mars. Frank continues his torment of Alice, forcing her to say "I love you" before planting a kiss on her lips. He then informs her that they will have children who will be raised to fear God, as her new female body is capable of childbearing. Once Frank leaves, Alice applies makeup and prepares to see him again, but is instead greeted by Jim. Accepting her new feminine identity, Alice recounts to Jim the horror of what Frank has done. Overwhelmed by emotion, they share a passionate kiss and begin to get intimate. However, Jim pulls away, telling Alice that he must confront Frank first. He hides her and goes in search of the villain, but Frank finds her before Jim finds him. When Jim arrives, Frank uses the electronic cuff to shock Alice, warning Jim that he will continue to harm her if he doesn't comply. Frank then presents another neck cuff to Jim, Jim, ordering him to put it on. Realizing that he has no other option, Jim complies, and Frank activates the cuff with a lethal voltage, severing Jim's head and killing him instantly. A horrified Alice then watches as Frank assaults her. After he's done seizing the moment, Alex grabs the remote control and strikes Frank, and she quickly places the neck cuff on him and triggers it, blowing his head clean off his shoulders. Fast forward 8 months later, Alice is now visibly pregnant and is reading the Bible with the ship's AI Red. Red informs her that he has found a way to reverse her transformation and turn her back into a male, but Alice declines, revealing that she's come to embrace and love her new identity. And suddenly, she starts experiencing contractions and collapses, falling unconscious. And just then, an alien figure emerges from the shadows, taking control of the ship's computer system. Alice wakes up to find herself restrained, and hears the aliens confirm that she's paralyzed and ready for colonization. And the movie ends on a dangerous note, with the Red Queen AI system navigating through space, pursued closely by a larger, menacing alien spacecraft.